Alrighty, here we go. Welcome everybody. Nice to see you all here. We are just welcoming everybody in, so do bear with us a little second. Feel free to turn your videos on if you would like to see each other's faces, but also don't feel you need to at all. If I could ask that you all keep yourselves muted during this presentation, and then we'll be able to ask you, you can unmute to ask questions and things in a short while. While we're just letting everybody through the virtual doors, as it were, I'm just going to do a few introductions. So my name is Jessie Wild and I'm one of the project directors for the Bristol Housing Festival. I was about to say on my left, but it's a screen, so it's going to be in different orders for everybody. We have Jez Sweetland, project director for the Bristol Housing Festival. Jez, do you want to give us a wave? There's Jez. We also have Christiana Mackeroo, who is from Goram Homes, the development director, and we also have Jeff Fox, development director for Goram Homes too. Give us a wave, Jeff. Thank you so much. And we also have Stephen Baker, who's the MD of Goram Homes, joining us very shortly as well. So you are hopefully all here because you have heard there's a design competition that Goram Homes is putting on for a site at Castle Park. If that's not why you're joining us for this meeting, then sorry, you're in the wrong place. But we are going to be basically going through a little bit of the competition, some information about the site. There shouldn't be too much new that's not already in the information pack that you could have seen, but hopefully this will give you an opportunity to ask a few questions, and we can have a bit of a discussion if there's anything that anybody wants to know. If after this webinar you still have questions, or you've got things that suddenly come to mind and spring to your mind afterwards, and you want to kind of pick up that conversation again later, feel free to drop me an email. You'll come through to me. So all the Housing Festival contacts, email addresses and things, you will come through to me, and I will be able to then redirect your questions to the various different people that need to answer them. So without too much further ado, and I'm going to stop talking now and hand over to Christiana and Jeff, who are going to talk us through who are Goram Homes, tell us a bit about what they are, what they're looking for, and a bit more about the site and that kind of thing. And then we'll move on to Jez, who can tell us a little bit about BHF and why we've got involved, why we're even working with Goram Homes on this kind of thing. And then we'll come back and we'll open the floor to Q&A. Feel free to put questions into the chat as we go, and where appropriate, I can then pick them up and kind of field those around. If not, feel free to just hold your horses, hold your questions, and there will be a time for Q&A, and then I will give you the kind of information you'll need around that as we get to that stage. But for now, just also to flag that we are recording this session and it is going out live on YouTube. Just so that those that couldn't register, because we got a lot of registrants for this email, so those that couldn't get on board so that they could work, could view the webinar as well. So I am just now going to hand over to Jeff and Christiana, and you should both now have permission to unmute yourselves. So please do go for it.
Thanks, Jessie, for the introductions. For those of you that don't know me, and there's many of you that will and many of you that won't, I'm Jeff Fox, the Partnership Director at Goram Homes. I'll just give you a brief introduction as to who Goram are, what we're about, just, so that everyone understands our role in this, and, a very brief introduction to Castle Park site. And then I'm going to ask Christiana to cover that in a lot more detail, just to go through, our vision and why we've gone for a design competition. So, go back a step or two. So who are Goram Homes? We're a subsidiary of Bristol City Council, and as such, we're one of a variety of delivery vehicles within the city. The Mayor of Bristol has very ambitious growth targets, basically, to try and help respond positively to the housing crisis, and Goram are seen as a vital part of that. And our main area of specialism is that we do joint ventures. Basically, our whole business is based around joint ventures. So we like to deliver projects that involve certainly policy compliant affordable housing as a minimum. We're part of the council, why wouldn't we? but we also do market sale housing. And, you know, we actually generate a share of the profit that is driven back into the council to help subsidise other services. So we actually are quite commercially driven. We are not the housing revenue team, and we're not building new council housing per se. So, you know, we're that hybrid, I guess, you know, that we have 1 foot in the private sector and 1 foot in the local authority sector. But we are here to deliver projects that we regard exemplar, and I think that you know is the message for this particular site. But it applies to all of our projects. So whether they're on some of the more suburban council estates where the council owns land, or whether it's a high value, prestigious site location like this one in the centre of Bristol, we're all about high quality. So how can we accelerate getting towards carbon zero? How can we respond positively to the biodiversity crisis and still deal with the housing crisis? So those are our challenges. And we want to be at the cutting edge of that. You know, we make no apologies for that, and we want to be able to do it all, basically. So, you know, we do want this to be at least a carbon zero project in terms of energy usage. We'd like to go further. We definitely want it, not least because it's next to an existing park, to be amazing in terms of biodiversity. And yeah, as I say, we certainly want, you know, the council policy here is 40% affordable housing, at least 40%. We will try and go beyond that, but we will want as a minimum 40% affordable. All of that is, you know, basically on a site which is in a very tricky site technically. It's going to be sitting above a water source heat pump. You know, I won't steal all of Christiana's thunder, but clearly, you know, common sense will tell you that that is going to be challenging. There's also quite a significant culvert coming under the site, and there's a lot of history and conservation issues to consider because we're so close to Bristol Council. So there's some massive issues and challenges here, but you know, we're excited by this project. We see massive challenges, but we see massive opportunities too to make a real statement about Goram Homes, and more importantly about Bristol as a city, and becoming a modern city that can respond in a positive way to all the challenges we face. So, you know, that is where we see this this site and this competition. It's an important site because it has so many challenges. If we can make this work, then we can surely make other sites work equally as well. So with that, I'm going to ask just Christiana to come in now and talk a bit more about the site itself.
Thank you, Jeff. I thought I could share an image with everyone just to set the scene as well. But as Jeff mentioned, this is a high value location and site for us. So that's primarily the reason why we decided to launch a competition, because of how important this scheme will be to the city itself. We thought we need to get the best possible outcome that we could. And of course, keeping in mind all of the objectives that we set out in the brief as well. So increasing biodiversity, primarily because also it sits adjacent to Castle Park, ensuring that it integrates well, not only with the park, but also with the surrounding neighborhoods and buildings. I'm sure everyone is aware there is a St. Melly Report master plan coming on, a redevelopment on the other side of, at the other end of Castle Park. So it's quite important to take that into account. Again, as Jeff mentioned, there is an energy center currently under construction that would be basically the foundation for this scheme. So we'd encourage you to, you know, if you're local to the Southwest, go and have a look at that. That's a 3 megawatt water source heat pump that will be getting built there. And we're hoping that the scheme would sort of integrate with that quite well. Again, a reason we're launching a competition is because it has to look amazing. We see it as possibly being a landmark building, again, primarily because of its location and significance to the area, but mostly because it will be exemplar in many ways. Again, as Jeff alluded to, you know, biodiversity net gain, being zero carbon, the quantum of affordable housing within it, and depending on the mix of uses within there, we want it to be the best scheme it can be, really. So we're launching the competition to everyone nationally, and hoping to get the best ideas out there.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much, Christiana. Jeff, back to you. Did you have something else to add?
No, I was just wrapping it up. I mean, obviously, yeah, it just can't be stressed enough how important this site is on a number of fronts to us and to the council. Clearly, we collaborate. So we collaborate with joint venture partners in delivery, i.e. developers, but we also collaborate closely with the council. So this project is going to be, even from a design point of view, all about collaboration is, I guess, the one thing I wanted to add. But back to you, Jessie, and over to Jez, I think.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Christiana. Jez, over to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about Bristol Housing Festival and give some context as to why we're supporting this design competition?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. I'd be delighted to. For those of you not aware of the Bristol Housing Festival, just a bit of context there. So we have been set up as a 5-year project in Bristol, and really around a couple of themes, but principally around how do we act as a catalyst and as an enabler to see solutions to our housing crisis. So for a lot of us, that is obviously about how we tackle our affordability in our housing crisis. But it's also about the climate and ecological emergency it's already referenced, and of course about the construction skills challenges that the country faces. And we see this opportunity in Bristol to bring together streams of work and to start to tell a more positive narrative. So the reason that we're so excited about this competition is it's another piece of this narrative of an opportunity to really showcase what excellence can look like, how we work together, how we collaborate, how we focus on those kind of outcome-led solutions, and then bring the wisdom and the intelligence of the design to get those solutions together. So that's the context of what we do. I think it's worth saying that we also believe it's really important then that we celebrate and we share good news in housing, because it is such a politically challenging environment to work in right now. We have a scenario where there are a lot of people who distrust the process, and for good reason. There are a lot of people who are very, very fearful now around the ecological and climate emergency, and how do we start to engage that legitimate fear to show how, as we look at our climate challenge, we also need to tackle our housing situation, and we have to do that in a way that is socially just, so that we can start to tackle both of those solutions together. They do not need to be separate areas, but what does good, wise compromise look like? We've also done quite a lot of work in MMC. This project does not in any way need to be MMC, but I think what we've started to see with the modern methods of construction opportunities that we've championed is there is this ability to collaborate in a different way. And again, just to pick up on what Jeff was saying, this is so important to us that this competition is both an example in terms of the outcome, but we want the process to really demonstrate what you can do where you have an alignment of shared vision, of shared purpose and shared process, because that also is building trust into the delivery. It speeds up the efficiency and it helps us work together really, really well. And I think we have a unique opportunity with Goram Homes. We started to work with Goram about 18 months ago, and it's an ongoing journey in terms of how we can support what they're doing. But one of the things that we first did with Goram was to look at some of their innovation strategy. This is a wholly owned housing company of the council. This is a unique opportunity for Bristol. And Goram is uniquely placed. Look at the sites that we're looking at today, these sort of incredibly important sites. And we want to really kind of be that opportunistic partner to this, to say, here is the vision, this is what we think we're going for together, but we also want to be in the right place for irritant. Because as this process moves forward, we know that the value challenge will come, the development appraisal process will come, and sometimes we just need people in the mix who can keep pulling us back, pulling on that handbrake and saying, well, hang on, we can't get too far away from our outcomes and our values in this process. And Goram is uniquely placed in that because it is a wholly owned subsidiary. Yes, it needs to work in terms of having great ideas that aren't built, don't actually serve anybody well. But the idea that we can ensure together that this is going to be a project that is an exemplar of both how it serves the housing crisis, how we build really good mixed and balanced communities, how we serve the ecological and climate emergencies that we face. So for us, innovation will be a key part of this, but as I say, not just in delivery, but actually in the process of how this competition moves forward. And I think too, as well, it's about rebuilding confidence in the process. So this notion of a site such as Castle Park in Bristol is so important. It has such emotive reactions by people engaged. So how we take stewardship over a site like this in Bristol and build something that will stand the test of time, that in 10 years, in 20 years, people can come back to and go, that was a fantastic project. How do we do more like that? That's going to be one of the acid tests, I think, for us all to really think about the wisdom of stewardship of land in such critical parts of the city and how that will speak into models that can then be built upon and learned, not just in Bristol, but actually in other parts of the country. So, I make no apology on behalf of the Housing Festival to say that we're privileged actually to be, partnering with Goram on this, partnering with the city and the council on this, because it's such an opportunity. And therefore, the idea of the competition isn't simply to get lots of people doing lots of work, but it is this notion of this is about stewardship and to find those right partners that can share a vision and help us explain a narrative to build trust about where we're going, not just actually on this site, but actually a narrative that starts to play out into a rethinking and a reimagining of how we deliver housing that is responsible for the future of the city, but also of the country and the planet. So it's a great opportunity. It's going to be complex. We recognize that, but we want the best minds and the best collaborators to work with us on this, because we do want this to be a kind of real stake in the ground for the future of the way that we can work together to serve the city. Jessie.
Thank you so much, Jez. So the competition, everything you should need to know is in the info pack, and we are updating the FAQs document that's also in that info pack as we go. So every time somebody asks us a question, whether people kind of email in or get in touch with us, every time that a question is asked, we are updating the kind of FAQs document that is in that folder that you can see online. So do check there first if you do have questions that are kind of unanswered, or you've got something that you're looking for, because it may well have been asked before. But if not, after this webinar, please do get in touch, as I said, with me, and I will make sure to get in touch with the right people. And I know there are a couple of questions outstanding that I still need to go back to different people with answers on, but they are being answered as we speak. They're not been forgotten if you are on this webinar. But essentially, just to kind of begin the conversation, we're looking for, so the first deadline for stage one is 25th of November at 5 p.m. So that's this month. And the idea of stage one is to just get an idea. We're looking for kind of big, bold ideas for the site, not looking for kind of detailed, worked up designs by this stage. It's simply just to see the ideas. So you'll see that what is being asked for is a maximum of 3 images and a maximum of an explanation of 500 words as to kind of where you're drawing inspirations from, and a kind of explanation of the image that you're submitting or images that you're submitting, along with again, maximum 500 words, understanding of who the organisation is that you're kind of applying on behalf of, or whether you're an individual or what have you, and what capacity you have to work with Goram Homes through to this. What will happen next is those submissions as a group will go to a judging panel, and I will leave Jeff and Christiana to talk through who is on that judging panel, and they will kind of sift those down through, and then a maximum of 5 people, or submissions I should say, will be invited then to develop those further. There'll be an amount awarded to each of those people, and again I'll come back to Christiana and Jeff to talk about that in more detail, but there'll be an amount awarded to each of those people to then develop those ideas further before we then make kind of stage 2 decisions as to who goes forward. So that's the kind of very basics of it, but it will be, we can go through more and more of the details and the questions. There are a few questions that have already come up into the chat box, so I'm going to start working my way through those. If you have questions, if you're sat in the panel, in the Zoom room, if you have questions you'd like to ask them just directly to Jez, to Jeff, to Christiana, please do raise your virtual hand, and you will pop up towards the front of my screen, and I will be able to kind of call on you, and if I invite you to unmute and turn your video camera on, and then you'll be able to ask a question directly. So do start putting your virtual hands up if you have specific questions, but I'm going to start working through the questions that were in in the box already. Right, wonderful. Forgive me, let me just start working through. Jonathan, I believe Kay has answered your question already, so I'm going to move on down there. So Jenny Goss asks if there is any more information on the energy and the heat pump for the building. So Christiana, Jeff, I'm going to point that one to you. Is there any more information that you can give on the energy centre and the heat pump?
We could provide the planning reference for people to be able to access all of the documents on the Bristol City Council's planning portal. Sorry, Jeff, were you about to say?
I mean, I was just going to add, obviously the Meinhardt report also deals with the design of the water source heat pump in terms of how you can build over the top of it. So I think those are the two bits of information we have. There is no more. That's it.
Brilliant.
I can actually put it in the chat.
Great, wonderful. If that would be brilliant, Christiana, if you could do that, thank you. And then I will also follow up with you and make sure that information goes into the that SharePoint folder as well for after this, for anybody that wants to follow up after this. Wonderful, thank you so much. We also have a question from Pat Stewart. Is the brochure that Christiana was showing us, is that available to everyone? So Christiana, you showed us an image earlier that was part of a larger brochure. Is that got information in it that we need, and can we see it?
I've only just seen that today myself, so I'll let Jeff
maybe going to sift it through.
Know if I can share it or not.
Yeah, I mean, there's no problem with sharing that particular image. It's an aerial photograph. At the end of the day, you could all get that by going on Google Earth yourselves or having something similar. But it is from a report where it's an old report by the Bristol City Council themselves that has a lot of information that's now just out of date. So I wouldn't advise sharing the whole document, but yeah, sure, we can share that one image.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Pat, I'm actually going to come to you because you've got your hand up. If you could unmute yourself and you can ask a question.
Thank you very much, Jessie. And this is there's been some really good reference here to stewardship. Jez, you talked about that, and to the importance of this space, this park, to the city and to local people. So my question is, what extent is this envisaged to be a architect or designer-led design competition rather than a community-led design competition? How's the community-led aspect of this? And I can see Barefoot Architects asked a similar question. Given the importance of the city, how are the community getting to get involved? Have they been involved already? Is there a summary of that if they have been? But community-led has got to be the way forward. So I'm just wondering how that plays into this whole process.
Wonderful. Shall I come to you, Jeff, first?
Yeah, let's kick off. I mean, I think and Jez alluded to this, we clearly want consultation and engagement on any of process such as this to be exemplar. So we definitely see the local community being sort of front and center in that process. It's also fair to say, though, that Bristol is a city of activists, isn't it? And we have a lot of people telling us every day why we cannot do things and are challenging. So let's have an honest conversation as well. Goram are nothing if not honest. So there will be some difficult conversations and difficult decisions. And certainly if we go tall with a building here, that they will become difficult conversations with a number of people. But, we will want to involve and engage and do the best we can. I mean, my own view is that, we should get the designs in first on this. We want to see the art of what's possible. But we then clearly do want to engage. And I actually think a steering group is needed to be set up, beyond just normal consultation events so that people are well aware. And, it will be challenging again, and it is a challenge. So who truly represents the local community there? Is it people who live in, expensive flats nearby, and they may well have a larger stake in it than some other people. So getting the right people, I think that's work in progress, but we wanted to get on with this vision, this design. And we do want that, to obviously be mindful of the wishes of local communities, but also these other priorities that we have, these challenges that we're facing at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeff. Pat, you also popped a question in the box about the timeline. So Jeff, I'm going to come back to you again before we move on too far, just to fully understand the timeline. So obviously we have the 25th of November, get the right month, which is this kind of deadline for the very first stage. And then the aim is to be selecting in from the second stage in kind of spring 2022, which at the moment is a little bit fluid, but it's kind of spring, so early next year. Jeff, can you speak any more to kind of the timeline beyond that?
Well, it is a reasonable estimate is what I would say at the moment, assuming that we have a winner of the competition in the spring. There then clearly would be a whole mass of detailed design and consultation and engagement process, the planning process basically to go through. If you're optimistic, that would be a 15 to 18 month process in Bristol. It could be longer. There will be technical information as well required, won't there? So, you know, you were talking that to get to detailed planning on this is at least 2 years away, in my opinion, and it could easily become, you know, beyond that. So, you know, that is where we're aiming, though. You know, we are under pressure to deliver new housing in the city for obvious reasons. So we don't want it to drag on, and we want to move as quickly as possible. But that feels like a realistic time frame to me.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeff. Jez, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of pick up on the question from Pat and Sam really about you know, the consultation element. And I think that one of the things we recognise in this process is because it's such a, you know, I mean, public consultation and community-led involvement is going to be critical on any site, and obviously you can do that well and you can do it badly. But this is a marquee site for the city, and one of the things that we'd love to demonstrate through this, the design of the projects and the process, is that innovation within some of that consultation as well. So although you know, people will have a view about, well, what's the kickoff point? I think it's really important to articulate that because it is a site that people have such strong emotive reactions to, we want to kind of frame some of the thinking by some of these designs as a starting, because that issue of getting right how we tackle our affordability crisis, how we tackle that climate and emergency crisis, how we, you know, steward responsibly an area like this that is such an important site to the city. If you open it up too much before you're even giving people a grid or a framework to be consulted on, it's quite difficult, because very quickly you end up going in 200 different directions. And at the end of the day, we want to bring people, you know, with this project and understand and articulate a positive narrative. So I think the process for us is, let's get these design competitions started. Let's get some really good exemplar thinking around what this site, how it could be developed. And then with us, part of that process, part of the opportunity of engagement and rebuilding trust, there's an opportunity to explain the thinking, to explain the complexity of the site, explaining the compromise that is going on to ensure that we are delivering that affordability as well as that ecological and climate challenge, how we are engaging, you know, not just those local neighbourhoods, but also other people, other stakeholders in the city who need a voice. So we all agree that is a key challenge. It's a key part of the process, but we want to frame that debate so that there is a sense of this is the kind of ambition and thinking that comes along with the site as we move forward.
Thanks so much, Jez. And Christiana, I'm going to come to you, as we've had a question from Jonathan Platt around talking through the decision-making process to make the selection. And I know you've been working specifically on the kind of the selection criteria. So wondering if you can share a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So we're currently drafting our selection criteria. Obviously, it would be everything that you've seen in the brief as well. But when we do look at the submissions, we would obviously be looking at the design itself and the innovation that Jed mentioned before, the bold ideas that we're looking to get, but also the quality of the design. So when it comes to materials proposed, I know that in 3 images, you can't get all of that, but I guess I can talk about sort of the overarching criteria that we're looking for, and obviously they'd start unfolding as the process moves along. So yeah, so it would be the materials and the design quality, and that also obviously includes the considerations of the surrounding area, surrounding architecture, the integration with Castle Park itself and the emerging master plan. and of course the energy center integration that I talked about before. Also, it would be the levels of sustainability. So Jeff also mentioned it before. We want to be low carbon, and that would include, the build and the life cycle of the building in itself. And that sort of element of design would also obviously include the sort of mix of uses and number of housing units that we can get onto the site. And then we would start thinking about sort of statutory requirements. So how the scheme would be compliant with local planning policy considerations, but also national. So when it comes to fire regulations, especially if we're talking about a tall building, and of course the levels of biodiversity net gain that we were talking about, that's more of sort of a calculated result that you can get. And then we would be thinking about the viability and buildability of the scheme itself. So obviously it's too early in this first stage to be thinking about that, but it will be something that's always at the back of our minds when we're selecting through the process. So that's just a few of the things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Can I push you a little bit though, in terms of for this first stage submission? Obviously we're asking for sort of a 500-word maximum explanation and 3 images maximum explanation. So obviously that's going to be tricky to get a lot of those kind of details into that. So just for the first stage submission, obviously there's all those bits and pieces to be thinking about over the project longer term, but just for that kind of first stage submission, how are you going to be making those kind of judgment calls, and what are the key things you're looking for in that initial stage in order to make those decisions to progress to stage 2?
I mean, it would be the potential that would be able to see, I think. I mean, obviously all these things about biodiversity net gain, details around material and zero carbon and all of these things, regulations, statutory considerations would all be coming sort of further along. But I think in the first stage, it would be important for us to see these bold ideas, see this something, that's exciting. We're looking to be inspired. That's why we are holding a competition in the first place. So it's about a balance between being innovative, inspiring, exciting, but also sort of alluding to the fact that a lot of things have been considered to put that forward. So it's not just about, designing a pretty building that will look amazing. It should be evident from the entries that thought has gone into that, for the future technical stages, if that makes sense. So, I think, it's not easy to make a beautiful building, but I think it's the easy part. It's how you get to that balance of objectives that you start sort of maybe losing it a bit. So I would say promise or potential would be the first one.
Thank you so much. And I'm imagining that off the back of some of that particular bit of the conversation, we're going to end up getting a few more questions. So it's kind of more of the picking that apart a little bit in terms of what actually do we need to do for submission 1. So is there something you'll be able to share after this that we can kind of put up on the website and make sure there's a bit more kind of information, a bit more detail about that we can put out?
Yes. So once we internally agree on sort of our main criteria for stage 1 specifically, we can put a list out and just make sure that everyone is aware of the same criteria that we'll be looking for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that would be really helpful. Okay, going back to the questions. Do put your virtual hand up if you do want to ask a question personally. If not, I will just keep working through the questions in the box. So we have a question here about the submissions being anonymous. So for stage 1, yes, me and my team are going to be in charge of making those submissions anonymous, and no one from Bristol Housing Festival is on the kind of judging panel for stage 1. So all the designs will come into the Bristol Housing Festival. We'll be kind of anonymising them appropriately, and then kind of passing those on to the panel. So what would be really helpful from my perspective is if you don't put your logos across the whole image, that would be super, super helpful. But obviously, you know, I'll do what I need to do to make it work. So yes, that initial stage one will be anonymous. We've touched on the pre-existing community question. Here we go. So from Miguel, are there specific end user focus groups that the housing scheme would like to address? So it's touching again into that kind of community engagement question similarly, but a specific end user focus groups. Are there those ones, Jeff, you were talking earlier about kind of community engagement. Are there specific end user focus groups that you're aware of that you're wanting to speak into with those?
No, there will be groups within the community, and that will form part of the community engagement. In terms of actual end users, if you mean who's going to occupy the building, if that's the question, they will be people who will either come and buy the market units or people on the housing waiting list within council, which is a big list, in need of affordable housing. So whilst we can probably get to some people who purport to represent those types of groups and people, we probably won't have the individuals who will move into their new homes when they're done. So it'll be picking the right groups and the right, the right, if you like, stakeholders to make sure we do have the voice of those people, and that they're a very important voice, particularly those in need of affordable housing. There's a massive need in the city, and clearly we want that voice to come forward when developments are being discussed. It's very often a neglected voice, in my opinion, at those things. But again, that still is work in progress, and I think that will come more at stage 2. And going forward from there, we will definitely want to involve people there, front and center if we can.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And I suppose sort of just kind of sticking with that kind of slight thing, almost like a slight tangent, but do you already have any kind of idea of the numbers required to make this a viable scheme in terms of houses? Do you already have any kind of sense of that in your head, or is that all up for grabs?
I mean, in one sense, everything's up for grabs, but in another sense, everything always does come back to viability. And I'm the person in the room that will be very practical and say, is this scheme viable or not? We've looked at, it's no surprise, we've looked at the numbers before on 50 units here, 50, and it's not enough. So we definitely see it going taller. I mean, I can see one of the other questions was, the Meinhard report, does that set where we think the heights and what have you should go? And I think no, the answer is we envisage a bold building here, so we do envisage going taller. I think Bristol, we work in a context of a planning policy where we can have tall buildings, but they've got to be of exemplar quality. And that, so that's just rings true with what we're saying. So whilst the Meinhard report shows what I'd call a medium-rise development, no, we definitely see ourselves going taller. I can't put a precise number on it. It will come down to how expensive the build is, against values. But I suspect, we're going to be looking in the order of 80 to 100 homes as a minimum, and possibly more. It just depends how high we go and still deliver that quality that we're looking for.
Jez, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I think, just to recognise that's why the process for this competition is so important, because one of the things we need to be able to articulate as we think through the design is this challenge around the right density for sites that are within the city centre. So that how does that reduce our carbon footprint across the city? How does that help us preserve more green spaces? There is a compromise in this, and we recognise in doing this that these are politically charged conversations, and therefore it's so important to us that we're very clear from the beginning around the values and the aspiration for the site. And so if we really want to deliver a net zero scheme and we really want to unlock brownfield sites in the city, we want them to bring a biodiversity net gain. We want to recognise that it's about quality and sustainability. That has a cost. And the choices are quite simple, aren't they? We can do nothing with a site and ignore the housing need, or we can do something with a site that is substandard and build lower, or we can look at how we increase our density to preserve more of our green spaces. So it's something around using this this process, this competition, this site to also have a mature debate across the city around some of those viability challenges that we face. And they're so important to this. So again, that's part of the consultation process, to use it as a way of explaining decision making and the wisdom of that decision making. We've then got the issues around sort of what does good, healthy living look like in these sorts of living structures post-COVID? What does it look like to build resilient, healthy community, mixed communities? What does it look like to tackle accessibility? And so all of these other issues play into this, and we want to make space as the design process work through to make sure that people are heard and understood. You can't do everything on one site, but you can explain your vision, your purpose, your narrative, and the compromises you've made to do as much as you can to steward it well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Des. Now, there have been a few questions around kind of teams. So clarification on will the winning winner be appointed to design the building on the site is one of them. And then if so, how will you appoint the remainder of the team? So do you want entrants to bid with a full team? Can engineers be part of that team? Are you looking for only specific, you know, can you explain a little bit more about how you see that element of it working and what you want people to apply with, whether they can do it as a joint bid, whether they can do it as whole teams, or whether it needs to be separate?
Okay. I mean, we see this as a design-led competition, and clearly, you know, someone can argue, well, you know, a scheme as complex as this, I need an engineer with me from day one. If you do that, you know, obviously that's your choice, and you know, to some extent, that it would arguably be beneficial to do that, but it is your choice. We certainly don't want full teams, you know, otherwise you're basically saying, well, if you've got the best design, you're basically then guaranteeing a whole team a certain amount of work. And that you know, we do have some procurement issues around that. So although, just so you all know, Goram sits outside of public procurement because we sit outside of City Council in terms of those regulations. So we've got some flexibility, but you know, the reason we're coming to a design competition and to designers is actually, you know, we could go straight to joint venture partners. You know, so I saw someone earlier ask, why haven't we gone straight to Hill or whatever? Well, we want design to be at the forefront of this. So if to do that well, you need an engineer with you, then you need to say so. But if you don't, you know, at this stage, and given, you know, stage one and what we talked about, then you can do it on your own. So it's largely your call, as I say. But you know, we're always open to suggestions, if you like. If you really think it's essential and you can't do your work even at stage one without an engineer, then you know, that's your call. Yeah, and then just going back to JV partners, I know Kate has already answered this to a large extent. We will eventually go out to tender in some form of at least mini competition, if not a full competition, for our JV partners. So we will get a private developer. It could be Hills, but it could be one of a number of people. And you know, they just happen to be working with us on one scheme in the city centre, but we're working on others already in other projects. Now, our intention will be to guarantee the winner of this competition at least taking this to stage 2 RIBA, to the end of that. And then there would be discussions with our JV partner as to whether you come forward and basically take it through to stage 3, i.e. detailed planning. That would be our preferred option as Goram, but it's a discussion ultimately with our JV partner at that stage. It's not a unilateral decision. By then we would have our JV partner in place. So by the time this process has gone through to stage 2, you know, so after an outline planning consent or at least enough detail to have achieved that, we will have a JV partner in place. So we will run a separate procurement process for that. And as I say, they will have a view on how to take this forward through to the detailed planning stage ultimately.
Thank you so much, Jeff. There's a question here from Jonathan around what has been learned from the scheme Goram have been developing on the caravan site, and how has that been applied to this site, which I think is a great question. So thank you so much, Jonathan. Can you speak a little bit, Christiana, I'm not going to ask this directly to you because I know you've only joined Goram recently, might not be so fair, But Jeff, specifically, I'm coming back to you. Can you speak a little bit about the site on the old caravan park that you're working on? Tell us a little bit about some of the lessons you've learned as Goram from that site and how it's being applied here.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, what it highlights for me, the caravan site, is that Bristol is full of activists with a lot of important stakeholders covering a lot of important issues. So trees are a very important and an emotive issue at the caravan park. I mean, I don't want to spend hours talking about the caravan park now, it's not appropriate or the right time, but trees are an important issue. Height is an important issue. Bristol sees itself as a medium-rise city. It doesn't see itself as a high-rise city. But you bring it back to the conversation that Jez was starting to raise, and we've got to have this adult conversation between, if we're not building to high densities in the city centre, and this is my opinion and Goram's view to a large extent, there is going to be added pressure on the suburbs. There will be more schemes where you won't be able to walk to work, where you will need to use the car and so on and so forth. So we actually think, we've got to push some of the boundaries. And, we don't like to use the word disruptor, but Goram does see itself as not just accepting the status quo. So we don't accept that Bristol should just remain a medium to low rise city. We think that's actually not the greatest way to go, given the other criteria, but we clearly need conversation. So the bottom line is, if there's one lesson, if you want to label it that, is that we clearly need to have a meaningful conversation at an early stage that's citywide, actually, because no site can be taken in isolation. And then, bring it back down to Castle Park and, learn from that, so that even if there are sometimes we agree to disagree, when we're taking things forward, that at least everyone acknowledges that there's been a thorough debate. And that sort of, if you like, ability to influence things genuinely is there, and we certainly want that to be the case. So yeah, it is basically involve stakeholders at an early stage. That's the key.
Jez, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think the other thing that we've really picked up, not so much on this scheme or the caravan club, but there is this also a huge challenge around explaining even what we mean by affordable housing, and who is this housing going to be for. And so one of the challenges we face is almost re-educating and explaining to people what affordable housing means in the context of Bristol. So when Jeff refers to the sort of 30-40% affordable housing targets as a minimum, one of the things we'd love to see if it's viable is to see if we can deliver more. But the question is, well, what does affordable housing mean? And of course, that means something, particularly in Bristol, that it doesn't necessarily mean in parts of London because of the policy we have here. So articulating to people why, Castle Park isn't just a sort of about, unlocking beautiful penthouse flats for people in the city centre. Actually, it's going to be about a really responsible statement of social justice as well, and how that is a part of the process to engage. But within that, a lot of people that may be consulted, there is a distrust and a misunderstanding about what that means. So people will see the price of the for sale homes in the city and go, well, they're not affordable, but actually we need to explain what the affordable element is for this. It's for the social housing, the city council housing. So again, huge challenge there. And I think how we pull the narrative together for this scheme with the design element is going to be a really important part of the winning the hearts and minds, because then it becomes a good news story for the city at large, and not just a battle through planning in terms of sort of, who can win a planning application. We need to really bring the wider city with us to see a really great scheme succeed, I think.
Thanks so much, Jez. The next question has already been touched on. It's from Duncan Blackmore around, can you say something about where the design work in the Meinhardt document came from and what it represents? So does it indicate something about the anticipated scale, form, or protection of views, for example, or should it be largely disregarded? And Jeff, I know you kind of touched on that in your earlier question, but I just wondered if you could speak to that directly.
Yeah, I think that the Meinhardt report had a lot of very useful information for anyone, technically looking to build over the water source heat pump. But the one thing it can be ignored on is how high can you go? You know, if you have sufficient high quality foundations, there's no reason why you couldn't take the mind hard thinking and analysis and then go taller. So I do not see that as the limit of our ambition in terms of height. No.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Okay, so moving on to a question from Adam. Can you provide any information about the emerging Broadmead area master plan that was referred to? Christiana, you spoke about that. Is there any more that you can share about that?
We can get together a pack that talks about surrounding emerging plans, if that would be useful, and then we can add that to the website as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I think that would be really useful, just so people can see the kind of what's coming out from around that area. Wonderful. Okay, so just working through the questions. So can we please clarify how the entries will be anonymised if you're assessing the project teams as part of the entry? So that will slightly depend on how many entries we get. So the two options are either that me and my team will either anonymise everything and not share the information about the companies at the first stage, so that the panel will only get the kind of images and the description. The other option is that those kind of the information about the organisation will be specifically anonymised, kind of by actually going through that and taking out some of the kind of all the references to names and things like that to make it slightly more anonymous. It will slightly depend on how many entries we get, but they're kind of the two options. So it will be anonymised for that first stage submissions. Last question that I can see in the box is, can international firms be part of this design-led team? And we have had that question via email as well. And Jeff, I'm going to come to you to kind of speak to it directly, but my understanding is we can't accept applications from international firms. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we wanted it to be a national competition. I mean, if someone internationally genuinely has connections with an architectural practice in the UK, then they could work collaboratively. You know, so somebody can be sat anywhere in the world and design things, but someone ultimately does have to come and walk the site and see Bristol and be a part of that. You know, if they're going to take this forward, there will be plenty of meetings and so on. So we see that, you know, as a national thing, not an international. You know, we don't want to add to carbon footprint by literally people flying in to deliver then a carbon-free scheme. It'd be rather ironic. So no, it must be within the UK.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I think that is all the questions in the box. So just giving everybody within this meeting a chance to put your virtual hand up if you have any other questions, but while you have a moment to put your hand up if you need to, panel, I'm going to come back to you one each at a time of the three of you and just ask for your kind of final reflections as we kind of end this on kind of any final thoughts of wisdom or pleas or things that you feel like need to be said that haven't yet been said. Jez, I'll come to you first.
Caught me on the hoof there. I think one of the things that is really important for me and for the festival in terms of sort of partnering with Goram on this is that we really want to be able to take this to the city as a celebration of the wisdom of good stewardship. And for us, that's important that we can, with you and with the partners, understand the narrative that supports the design, because there's an element of the wisdom that's gone into the design, and that is got to speak into the affordability, the ecology, the design, the mixed and resilient community aspect. So this is about good design, but it's almost like what's your working behind that we can really understand, and then of course through the process both tease out and perfect, but as importantly articulate the compromise, because you know we know we can't do everything together on one site. So that ability to justify, to defend, but to celebrate as well in terms of the wisdom and stewardship of the site is going to be really important, I think, for us to see a great scheme come forward.
Thanks, Jez. Christiana, can I come to you?
Sure. I mean, I would repeat everything Jez said, but also add to the fact that, you know, we talked about before Bristol having its own character, Bristol being full of activists, needing to win, you know, everyone's hearts and minds in this. So to me personally, it's really important that it's a scheme for Bristol, in Bristol, if that makes sense. It's quite important that when people see it, they don't feel like it could have been anywhere else in the world. And I know that's quite a vague statement in a way, but I think it's something that would play a big role in getting the community and all the stakeholders on our side. So I'm just going to leave you with that, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Jeff, can I give you the final word on the panel?
Thanks, Jessie. Yeah, I think actually replication for me is key. You know, I don't want to see a scheme that wins all sorts of fancy awards and then, you know, it is a one-off, almost like, you know, in the future, and we think, why did we ever do that? I want to see real ideas translating into high density city centre living that can be replicated in Bristol, you know, okay, with tweaks, and throughout the UK, at least, if not elsewhere, you know. So I want this to be everything. I want it to look brilliant, but I want it to be practical. I want it to be cost effective, you know, etc. So that it's not just replicable, even say for high-end elite flats, but it can be applied to affordable housing in the future and so on, even if it's 100% affordable going forward. So to me, it's about deliverability and you know, and that model being able to be replicated rather than it just looking pretty. But we still want it to look good as well.
Of course, of course. Thank you so much, Jez, Christiana and Jeff, for joining us this afternoon to answer some questions. Thank you so much to everybody on the call for joining us, to listening in, to submitting your questions. It's been a great conversation. As I said before, right at the beginning, if you have further questions or you want further clarifications or you want further details on anything that we've mentioned or have failed to mention, please do get in touch with me. So all the kind of details that are on the website, all the details that are in that info pack and in that folder will direct you to me. So send through the questions and I will endeavour to find the right person to answer it and come back to you as soon as possible. As I said, I am updating the FAQ document as we go. So every time anybody asks a question, the kind of answers are being made as available as possible on the FAQ document. So do check that out before you submit a question, just because if it's already on there, it'll be helpful. But other than that, please do get in touch, and we're really looking forward to seeing some of these ideas coming through. We are all, I think, really quite excited about the potential for this site. I'm really looking forward to meeting the people that we're going to be working with longer term in the future on this. So thank you so much for your time and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Very good.